Let me tell you something about my species. We, the Vurrak, have been around for approximately 6,000 years. 6,000 years of space travel, 6,000 years of war, 6,000 years of politics, 6,000 years of terrible food and even worse diplomacy. In all that time, in all those centuries of watching civilizations rise and fall like bread that cannot decide whether it wants to be baked or not, we have made exactly 3 mistakes that our historians still refuse to write about. The first was trusting the Pelori with our financial systems. The second was letting the Drenkai host a peace summit on their home planet, which, by the way, smells like the inside of a dying star that ate something bad. And the third was the day we looked at a human, a single, soft, squishy, embarrassingly fragile human, and said out loud, with our full chests and absolutely zero hesitation, "We will bet against that thing." My name is Groth Pellax. I am a senior observer for the Interstellar Combat Verification Bureau, which is a title that sounds important but mostly means I sit in a very uncomfortable chair and watch beings beat each other senseless for sport while filing detailed reports about it afterward. I have watched 342 fights in my career. I have seen Korrathi warriors rip titanium plating off ships with their bare hands. I have seen a Drenkai soldier survive being shot through the chest 4 times and then ask for lunch. I have seen the Velhari, who are essentially walking bags of nerve endings, somehow develop a combat style so efficient that entire academies study it. Nothing, and I want to be extremely clear about this, nothing prepared me for what happened on the station known as Vurrak's Point. It started as most catastrophic events do, with someone saying, "This will be fine." Vurrak's Point is not a nice place. It is the kind of station that exists in the space between legitimate civilization and the parts of the galaxy that civilized beings pretend do not exist. Imagine taking a very large asteroid, hollowing it out, filling it with gambling halls, combat arenas, black market traders, and beings who would sell their own grandmother's memory cube for the right price, and then giving it a name that sounds vaguely respectable. That is Vurrak's Point. The station operates under the management of a Threxian crime consortium called the Oblique House. The Oblique House runs the combat betting pools, which are, in simple terms, the place where idiots go to lose money by predicting which fighter will survive a sanctioned bout. The odds are set by a system called the probability engine, which takes in data about height, weight, species biology, combat history, strength metrics, pain tolerance, and about 400 other variables, and spits out a number that tells you how likely a given fighter is to win. The probability engine had never, in 47 years of operation, been wrong by more than a 7% margin. I would like you to keep that number in your mind. 7%. That is the maximum error. 7%. The Oblique House's head of operations was a Threxian named Vurrak. Vurrak was the kind of being who made you feel like your wallet was lighter just by standing near him. He had 4 arms, 17 fingers distributed among those arms in a way that always looked slightly threatening, and a smile that his own employees described as the last thing you see before you realize you made a terrible financial decision. On the day in question, Vurrak was standing in his office on the upper level of the station, looking down through the reinforced plexite window at the arena floor below, and he was smiling that smile. "Tell me again," he said to his assistant, a Pelori named Is Thonn, "what exactly we are dealing with here." Vekpul pulled up the datapad and read from it in the flat, slightly nervous tone that all of Vurrak's assistants eventually developed as a survival mechanism. The challenger entered registration 40 hours ago. Species human, age 29 standard years, name Rynn Dekker, previous combat record, 7 wins, 0 losses, all from underground circuits in the outer spiral territories. Vurrak tilted his head. Outer spiral underground circuits. Yes, sir. So basically, he has been fighting in places even we consider low budget. That would be an accurate characterization, sir. Vurrak looked back down at the arena floor and tapped 2 of his fingers together in the way he always did when he was calculating something. And who signed him up to fight Thonn Brex? There was a pause. A very specific kind of pause that Is Thonn had learned to deploy when he was about to say something that would make his employer either very happy or very angry, and he had not yet determined which one it would be. The human signed himself up, sir. Vurrak turned from the window very slowly. He walked into our registration office. Yes, sir. He looked at the available opponents list. Yes, sir. He saw Thonn Brex, who is a Korrathi gladiator with a 44-0 record, and arms the size of small vehicles, and he said, and I am quoting from the registration audio, "Yeah, that one. I want that one." Vurrak stared at Vurrak for a long moment. Then he turned back to the window. Then he started laughing. It was not a pleasant laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has just realized they are about to make a tremendous amount of money. Set the odds at 100 to 1 against the human, Vurrak said, and open the betting pools to the entire station. Now I should tell you about Thonn Brex, because if you are going to understand why every single being on Vurrak's point opened their wallets and threw money at the Oblique House that day, you need to understand what Thonn Brex was. Thonn Brex was Korrathi. The Korrathi are a species that evolved on a high-gravity world with frequent seismic activity, 200 km/h wind seasons, and predators that make the worst things on any other planet look like friendly pets. As a result of this extremely unpleasant upbringing, evolution decided to give the Korrathi what can only be described as an unfair advantage in every possible physical category. Average Korrathi height, 2.8 meters. Average Korrathi weight, 340 kilograms of dense muscle and reinforced bone structure. Average Korrathi pain threshold, roughly 4 times that of a Vurrak, which is already considered high. Thonn Brex was not an average Korrathi. Thonn Brex was the Korrathi that other Korrathi looked at and said, "That one is a bit much." He stood 3.1 meters tall. His record of 44 wins included 16 fights that had been stopped early because his opponents needed immediate medical intervention before the match technically concluded. He had a habit of fighting with one arm held behind his back for the first half of any bout, not as a taunt, but because he said it was more interesting that way. His last 3 opponents had all required extended stays in the medical bay. One of them had developed a philosophical career afterward because, as he said, spending 3 weeks unconscious gave him a lot of time to reconsider his life choices. The probability engine assessed the match and came back with a win probability for Thonn Brex of 97.3%. The remaining 2.7% was distributed among variables like catastrophic equipment failure, sudden medical event, and a category the engine had labeled unknown anomaly, which was its way of acknowledging that sometimes the universe does something it cannot predict. What the probability engine did not have a category for was human. I arrived at Vurrak's point approximately 6 hours before the fight. I had been assigned to observe and verify the bout as an official record, which meant my presence was sanctioned, and my chair, while still deeply uncomfortable, was at least positioned with a decent view. My colleague, another observer named Preet Dallo, was already there when I arrived. Preet is Drenkai, which means she is approximately half my height, twice as loud, and operates on a level of confidence that would be impressive if it were not so consistently misplaced. "You are late," she said, without looking up from her data pad. "I am precisely on schedule," I said. "You are 6 minutes late." 6 minutes is within acceptable parameters. The acceptable parameters were set by you, for yourself, which is not how parameters work. I sat down in my chair, which was, as predicted, very uncomfortable. "Tell me you have already reviewed the fighter profiles." "I have reviewed everything." Preet set down her data pad and looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as delighted concern, which is the face someone makes when they are excited about something they are also worried about. "Groth, have you looked at the human?" "I reviewed the file on the transport over." "Did you watch the footage?" "There was footage." Preet picked up her pad again and handed it to me without a word. On the screen was a recording from one of the outer spiral underground circuits. The quality was poor, the lighting was worse, and the camera operator appeared to have filmed it while also eating something and possibly arguing with someone off-screen. But the subject of the recording was clear enough. Rynn Dekker, standing in the center of a makeshift ring, surrounded by beings that were all significantly larger than him. Now, I will be honest with you. My first impression of Rynn Dekker was not inspiring. He was by human standards, apparently average height, which by Vurrak standards made him a fairly small being. Brown hair, cut short. A build that could be described as lean if you were being generous and worryingly thin if you were being accurate. He was wearing simple combat gear, nothing reinforced, nothing special, and he was standing with his hands loose at his sides, head slightly tilted, watching the larger being across from him with an expression that I would later learn to recognize as uniquely human. It was an expression that had no direct translation in Vurrak. The closest I could get was something like, "I am already planning what I am going to do to you, and I find this entire situation mildly entertaining." The fight lasted 48 seconds. I watched it twice, then I watched it a third time. "What am I looking at?" I asked Preet. "Something that should not be possible," she said, and for once she did not sound delighted. She sounded like someone who had just done a complicated calculation and was waiting for someone else to confirm she had not made an error. The betting windows opened at noon station time. The line was, I am told, unprecedented. Word had gotten around Vurrak's point the way word always does in places like this, fast, distorted slightly at every step, and arriving at the ears of potential gamblers in a form that was just accurate enough to be exciting and just wrong enough to be dangerous. The version that was circulating by the time the windows opened went something like this. A human had signed up to fight Thonn Brex. The odds were 100 to 1 against the human. Thonn Brex's fight record was 44-0. The human's fight record was 7-0, but those fights had been in the outer spiral underground, which everyone knew was basically organized nonsense. The obvious conclusion reached by approximately 93% of Vurrak's point's population was that the human was about to lose very badly and they were going to make money watching it happen. The betting windows collected 460,000 credits before the cutoff. 460,000 credits, at 100 to 1 odds against the human. If Thonn Brex won, the Oblique House would collect all of it minus the standard operational fee. If the human won, well, nobody was thinking about that, because nobody thought the human was going to win. I should tell you that I, Groth Pellax, senior observer, filed witness to 342 fights, person who watched that footage 3 times and felt a very specific kind of unease about it. I also placed a bet. I bet against the human. I am not proud of this, but I am telling you this because honesty is important, and also because what happened next was the kind of thing that is very slightly more amusing if you know that the person telling you the story was also wrong. I met Rynn Dekker approximately 2 hours before the fight. This was not something I typically did. Observers are supposed to maintain neutrality, which means limited pre-fight contact with participants. But one of the station's junior staff had made an error in the fighter check-in process that required an official observer to verify some documentation, and I was the one closest to the registration area when the error was discovered. So I ended up standing in the doorway of the human's preparation room with a data pad and a mildly annoyed expression. He was sitting on the bench in the middle of the room, doing something with his hands. I looked closer. He was shuffling a deck of cards, not combat cards, not strategy cards, not anything with a tactical application, an actual deck of recreational playing cards, the flat kind, with colorful patterns on the backs, the kind that humans apparently used for games that had no direct combat application whatsoever. "You are Rynn Dekker?" I asked. He looked up. The expression was the same one I had seen in the footage, that mild, slightly amused, already thinking about something look. "That's me," he said. His voice was easy, not nervous, not excited, not in the way that beings who were genuinely frightened often affected excitement, just easy. "I am Groth Pellax, senior observer. There was a documentation error in your check-in. I need to verify your combat license certification." "Sure." He set down the cards, reached into the side pocket of his gear bag, and handed me a folded document without even standing up. "Third page is the certification, if that's what you are looking for. The stamp in the top right corner is from the Outer Spiral Regional Authority. I know it doesn't look like much, but it's legitimate." I checked it. It was in fact legitimate. "Your record shows 7 wins," I said. 7-0, yeah, against opponents in the Outer Spiral underground circuits. Mostly. He picked the cards back up and continued the slow, easy shuffle. One of them was a crossover from the mid-spiral sanctioned leagues. He dropped down to the underground circuit because he thought it would be easier money. Turned out it wasn't. He paused. For him, I mean, it was easier money for me. I looked at him for a moment. "You are aware of who you are fighting today?" "Thonn Brex." "Yeah, Korrathi, 44-0. Likes to hold one arm behind his back in the early rounds, which sounds like a taunt but is actually a technique. He uses it to study movement patterns before committing to a strategy." He glanced up at me with that expression. "You are going to ask me why I picked him." I was in fact going to ask him exactly that. "I picked him," Rynn said, "because the odds are 100 to 1, and because I need 100 times what I walked in here with." I stared at him. "You bet on yourself." "Every credit I own." The number was not large by station standards, but at 100 to 1 odds if he won it would be significant. "And you believe you will win?" I said. It was not quite a question. He looked up at me again. The cards continued their slow shuffle in his hands. "Groth," he said, using my name with a familiarity that most beings did not extend to Vurrak observers on first meeting, "can I ask you something?" "You may. When you look at a fight on paper, what's the first thing you check?" I considered this. "Species biology, physical capacity metrics." "Right." He nodded. "And that's why the odds are 100 to 1. Because on paper the biological metrics say I should not be able to win this fight. He set the cards face down on the bench beside him. But here's the thing about biological metrics, Groth. They measure what a body can do under normal circumstances. They don't measure what a body will do under pressure. And they definitely don't measure what a brain will do when the body is losing. He stood up. He was, as I had observed, not particularly large. The top of his head reached approximately to my collarbone. Humans are bad at losing, he said. Not bad in the way that means we quit. Bad in the way that means something in us just refuses. Even when the math says we should. Even when every physical metric says it's over. He smiled, and it was not the smile of someone who was pretending to be confident. It was the smile of someone who had already done the calculation. We are unreasonably stubborn. It's kind of our thing. I left the preparation room with the verified documentation. I went back to my chair, which was still uncomfortable. I sat in it and stared at the arena floor below and thought about what he had said. And then I went to the betting window and tried to change my bet. The window was closed. Betting had concluded. I went back to my chair. The arena at Vurrak's point holds approximately 6,000 spectators, seated in tiered rings around the central combat floor. The floor itself is a 30-meter circle of reinforced composite material, with shock absorption panels beneath and a barrier field above that keeps the audience from any direct contact with the fight while still allowing a clear view. There are screens at 4 cardinal points that provide close-up footage for spectators in the upper tiers. By the time the announcement sequence began, every seat was occupied. 6,000 beings of approximately 30 different species, and every single one of them, with a very small number of exceptions that I will not specify because it is embarrassing, had bet their money on Thonn Brex. The announcement sequence was handled by a Pelori named Doxfar, who had been the arena's official announcer for 11 years and had a voice that could make the opening of a restaurant sound like the final moments of an interstellar war. Dox was exceptionally good at his job. Citizens of Vurrak's point, Dox said, his voice rolling across the arena with the practiced gravity of someone who understood theater, guests of the Oblique House, honored observers, and beings of every corner of the known galaxy, welcome. The crowd noise was significant. Tonight we witness a contest of remarkable contrast. Even through the professional delivery you could hear the faint smile in Dox's tone. In one corner, the champion of champions, the undisputed colossus of the combat circuit, with a record of 44 wins, 0 losses, and a history of bringing this very arena to its feet, the pride of the Korrathi people, Thonn Brex. The sound that came from 6,000 beings in response to that name was not entirely describable in written form. It was the sound of a crowd that has invested money and emotion into a specific outcome and has found an outlet for both simultaneously. Thonn Brex walked into the arena from the eastern corridor, and he was everything his statistics suggested he would be. 3.1 meters, 360 kilograms, moving with the unhurried certainty of something that has never, in its entire fighting career, had a reason to hurry. He raised 2 of his forearms in acknowledgement of the crowd without breaking stride. The lights caught the scarring on his skin, the accumulated history of 44 fights, none of which had given him anything worse than a scar. He stepped to his mark on the arena floor and looked across it with the expression of someone who had not yet bothered to think about their opponent. And in the other corner, Dox continued, and there was a pause. A very deliberate pause of the kind that experienced announcers deploy when they want the audience to feel the weight of what they are about to say, a fighter from the outer territories of the spiral's edge. With a record of 7 wins and 0 losses, representing a species that is new to this particular stage, the human, Rynn Dekker. The crowd response to this was, in technical terms, very different. It was not silence. It was something weirder than silence. It was the sound of 6,000 beings making a collective noise that contained equal parts amusement, disbelief, and the particular anticipatory energy of someone who is watching a situation they believe they already know the outcome of. Rynn walked in from the western corridor. He was still wearing the same combat gear. He had not added anything to it. No extra reinforcement, no visible enhancements, no equipment beyond the standard padded gloves and boots that the arena provided. He walked the same way he had been sitting in that preparation room, easy, like he had somewhere comfortable to be later, and this was just a thing he was doing on the way there. He reached his mark on the arena floor and looked across at Thonn Brex. Thonn Brex finally looked back at him. There was a moment, and I want to be precise about this because it mattered. There was a single moment where the Korrathi gladiator looked at the human across 30 meters of arena floor, and something shifted in his expression. It was not concern, it was not worry. It was something much smaller than that. It was the expression of a being who has just noticed something slightly unexpected and has filed it away to examine later. I do not know what Thonn Brex saw when he looked at Rynn Dekker in that moment. I know what I saw. I saw someone who was not afraid. Not pretending not to be afraid. Not afraid but suppressing it. Not the particular kind of tension that even experienced fighters carry into a bout with a superior opponent, the tension that lives in the shoulders and the jaw and the slightly too deliberate stillness of the hands. Rynn Dekker was not afraid. He was watching Thonn Brex the same way he had watched the cards in his hands in that preparation room. Like it was interesting. Like it was something to pay attention to. And right then, sitting in my deeply uncomfortable chair, watching this on the screen and in the arena floor below simultaneously, I felt something that I, as a 6,000-year species member and professional observer, should have recognized earlier. I felt the specific sensation of being about to watch something I could not have predicted. The official start signal was a tone, 3 seconds, then a sharp crack that carried through the arena sound system with enough force to feel it in your chest if you were sitting close enough. Thonn Brex moved the moment the signal sounded. For something his size, his speed was genuinely alarming. Korrathi musculature operates on a different mechanical principle than most species. The muscle fibers compress and release in a sequence that generates more force per kilogram than anything of comparable mass should be capable of. This is the thing that makes Korrathi warriors so effective. It is not just their size, it is the combination of size and that specific mechanical advantage that makes them force multipliers in a way that the raw numbers do not fully capture. He crossed half the arena distance in approximately 2 seconds. One arm extended for the grab, the other held back for the follow-through strike. Rynn Dekker moved sideways. Not backward, sideways. There is a distinction there that mattered enormously, and that in my professional assessment, the vast majority of the 6,000 beings watching did not understand in that moment. Moving backward from a Korrathi advance is the predictable response, and it is largely ineffective because the Korrathi stride length simply covers the distance faster than the retreating fighter can maintain a safety margin. Moving sideways is non-standard. It changes the angle of engagement, and more importantly, it means that when the grab arm reaches the position where the fighter was standing, there is no fighter there. Thonn Brex's grab closed on empty air. There was a pause in the crowd noise. The kind of pause that lasts a very specific fraction of a second and contains a very specific kind of recalibration. Rynn had moved sideways and angled inward rather than away, which put him to Thonn's left side at a distance of approximately 3 meters. As the Korrathi completed the follow-through of the missed grab and began the rotation to reacquire his target, Rynn moved again, this time not sideways but a sharp pivot forward, directly into the space that Thonn's arm had just swept through. He hit Thonn Brex in the side of the knee. Not a punch. A very precise, very hard strike with his elbow, using the full angular momentum of the forward pivot to concentrate force into the smallest possible surface area. Thonn Brex did not fall. Of course he did not fall. You do not topple a Korrathi gladiator with one elbow strike to the knee, but his knee did flex, briefly, in a way that knees are not supposed to flex, and that flex caused a momentary interruption in the rotation that he had been using to reacquire Rynn's position. That interruption lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. Rynn used that 1.5 seconds to move to a position approximately 5 meters behind and to the right of Thonn, which placed him in a location that required Thonn to complete a 3/4 rotation to address. This sounds simple when I describe it in seconds and meters. It did not look simple. It looked like watching someone navigate a space that kept trying to close around them by finding gaps that should not exist. Prite, who had been silent beside me since the fight started, said something in Drenkai that I did not need to translate because the tone carried the meaning clearly enough. Something along the lines of, "Oh, that's what he's doing." Thonn Brex completed his rotation and came back in. This time he adjusted. The arm position changed, the approach angle changed, and the speed was higher than the first pass, which suggested that even 44 fights into his career, Thonn Brex was still capable of adapting in real time to new information. This is why he had a 44-0 record, not just because he was enormous and strong and fast, because he was smart. Rynn moved again, sideways again but a different direction, a different angle, and this time he did not go inward. He let the grab arm pass over him because he had dropped his height by bending both knees simultaneously, and as Thonn's arm passed through the space where Rynn's upper body had been, Rynn came back up and put his forearm against the inside of Thonn's wrist and pushed. Not hard, not trying to overpower the arm, but using the mechanical leverage of the angle to redirect the arm's follow-through momentum away from its intended path. This caused Thonn's arm to swing out wider than intended, which for a brief moment disrupted his balance. Again, very brief. 1 second, perhaps. Rynn hit him in the same knee again. Same spot, same precise, same concentrated, same absolutely relentless targeting of that single point. Then Rynn was 5 meters away again, moving lightly, watching. The crowd had gone from amused noise to a very different kind of noise. Quieter, more concentrated. The noise of beings who came expecting to watch one thing and are now watching something they do not have a category for. I looked at the close-up screen. It showed Thonn Brex's face. He was not afraid either, but he was no longer bored. His 4 eyes were fixed on the human with an attention that had not been present 30 seconds ago. The sound from 6,000 beings, reduced to something almost like wondering, hung over that arena like something uncertain, because they had all bet on one outcome. And the fight was 45 seconds old. And absolutely nothing so far had looked like that outcome. I need to pause here and tell you what the probability engine was doing during those 45 seconds. The engine runs continuous probability assessments throughout any fight it is monitoring. It updates in real time as combat data comes in, weight shifts, contact events, movement patterns, fatigue indicators, all of it feeds into a constant recalculation. The engine is not supposed to be accessible by general station population during a live fight, but the Oblique House's screens have a secondary probability display for fight staff, and I have a clearance level that gave me access to that feed from my observer position. 45 seconds into the fight, the probability engine's assessment of the match outcome had changed. Thonn Brex win probability, 89.4%. It had dropped. Not by a little. Not by the kind of rounding error fluctuation you see in normal fights. It had dropped from 97.3% to 89.4% in 45 seconds. The engine was seeing something. I was seeing something. And 460,000 credits, distributed among 6,000 beings who had all made the same confident, logical, reasonable, completely wrong assessment, were beginning to feel slightly uncertain. Thonn Brex charged again. 3rd time, and this time he did not use the grab arm. He led with a straight strike, full Korrathi force, aimed at the center of Rynn's chest. This was a significant change in tactic, and it indicated that Thonn had identified the problem with the grab approach and had decided to shift to direct impact as the solution. The strike, if it connected, would likely end the fight. Not kill Rynn. The arena's medical protocols were too thorough for that to be a realistic outcome, but end the fight in the way that required significant involvement from the medical team. Rynn moved sideways, again, and then something happened that made the entire arena produce a sound I had never heard in 342 fights. He moved sideways, and then he moved forward, directly into the path of the incoming strike, and instead of trying to redirect it or avoid it, he put both forearms together in front of his chest in a cross block, and he took the strike. On his arms, a full Korrathi direct strike. On his arms, he went backward. Of course he went backward. The force of impact sent him sliding 4 meters across the composite floor. The crowd made that sound, the sharp collective intake that does not have a written equivalent, but that you can feel in your own chest as a sympathetic response, as every being in the arena processed the sight of a human being hit by something that should have ended the fight. He stopped sliding. He was still standing, barely. His arms were down, his weight was shifted wrong, and it was absolutely clear that the impact had done real damage because no amount of stubbornness protects bone from that kind of force completely. Thonn Brex looked at him. Rynn Dekker looked back. He did not fall. He reset his stance, and the movement was slower than before, and his left arm was slightly lower than his right in a way that indicated that left arm was currently not at full capacity. But he reset his stance, and he looked across the arena floor at the being who had just hit him hard enough to rearrange most people's immediate future. And he did that thing with his expression. That mildly amused, already thinking about something thing. And he said loudly enough that the arena's ambient pickups caught it and carried it to every screen in the building. Okay, good. Now I know how hard you hit. 6,000 beings sat in complete silence for approximately 2 seconds. Then the noise that came from the crowd was not the noise of beings watching an expected outcome. It was not the comfortable satisfaction of money being confirmed. It was something else entirely. It was the sound of a crowd that has just realized it is watching something it does not understand, and that despite itself, despite its financial interest, despite every logical reason to feel otherwise, it is interested. The probability engine updated its assessment. Thonn Brex win probability, 78.1%. In my uncomfortable chair, I gripped the armrest. Pryo was no longer doing anything with her datapad. She was just watching. Neither of us said anything. The fight was 90 seconds old, and Rynn Dekker, who had just been hit by the equivalent of a very fast freight vehicle, was smiling. There is a concept in Vurrak philosophy called Veth Oran. The direct translation is something close to the moment a plan becomes a catastrophe, but the cultural weight of the phrase is heavier than that. It refers specifically to the point in any sequence of events where the outcome becomes inevitable, where the momentum has shifted too completely for anything to reverse it, and where the only question remaining is not what will happen, but how much it is going to cost. Every Vurrak child is taught to recognize Veth Oran. We are taught to see it coming. We are taught that the ability to identify it before it fully arrives is one of the most valuable skills any thinking being can develop. I am Groth Pellax, Senior Observer. 342 fights on my professional record, 6,000 years of species history behind me, and I am going to be completely honest with you. I did not recognize Veth Oran when it arrived at Vurrak's point that evening, but I should have, because the signs were all there. The fight was 90 seconds old, and Rynn Dekker was smiling. That should have been the sign. That should have been the moment where anyone paying attention understood that the variables had shifted in a direction the probability engine was not fully equipped to measure. Because here is something that 342 fights had taught me, though apparently not well enough to be useful when it mattered. Experienced fighters do not smile when they are hurt. They endure, they manage, they adapt. But the smile, the specific, easy, already calculating smile, that is something that only appears on the face of a being that has just gathered information it needed, and is now doing something with it. Rynn had needed to know how hard Thonn hit, so he had found out. Thonn Brex crossed the arena toward him again, and this time the approach was different, slower, not cautious exactly. Thonn Brex did not do cautious, but deliberate in the way that experienced combatants become deliberate when they have identified that their opponent requires a different kind of attention. He moved with more weight in each step, more intention. Rynn did not wait for him to arrive. He moved first, not backward, not sideways, forward, and at an angle, cutting diagonally across the arena floor toward Thonn's right side, which forced Thonn to adjust his trajectory, which meant that for 3 steps, Thonn was moving in a direction slightly different from the one he had committed to, and that meant his body weight was slightly misaligned with his momentum. Rynn hit him in the knee again. 3rd time, same spot, same elbow, same force. And this time, Thonn Brex's knee buckled. Not collapsed, not failed. Buckled briefly the way a structure does when cumulative stress finally exceeds the tolerance that repetitive impact has been quietly eroding. It was a single step that came down wrong, that took weight it was not quite ready to take, and it caused Thonn Brex to drop his center of mass by approximately a quarter meter for a period of maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds is not very long. 2 seconds is, however, enough time for a human who has been calculating angles and patterns and movement sequences since before the fight started to close the remaining distance between himself and his opponent and do something very specific. Rynn went up. He jumped, using Thonn's momentarily dropped center of mass as a reference point, and he put his good arm, the right one, around the back of Thonn's neck, and he used the combined force of his own weight and the jump momentum to apply pressure to a very specific cluster of nerve points on the back of a Korrathi neck that, if you apply the correct concentrated force to the correct precise location, produce a temporary disruption in the neural signaling between the brainstem and the upper limbs. I know this because I looked it up afterward. I looked it up because I needed to understand what I had watched. It is called, in the xenobiology literature, a Korrathi neural interrupt. It is listed in exactly one academic paper, authored by a xenobiologist who spent 11 years studying Korrathi physiology. The paper describes it as a theoretical vulnerability and notes in the conclusion section that successfully executing it in a combat scenario would require precise anatomical knowledge, exceptional timing, and a delivery angle that would be practically impossible to achieve against a fully alert, actively resisting Korrathi opponent. The paper was published in a journal that was read by xenobiologists and almost nobody else. Rynn Dekker was apparently not a xenobiologist, but he had very clearly read the relevant literature, or spoken to someone who had, or possibly spent a significant amount of time figuring this out through other means that I decided I was better off not thinking too hard about. Thonn Brex's arms dropped. Not permanently, not catastrophically. For approximately 4 seconds both pairs of Thonn's arms were not responding to the signals his brain was trying to send them with their usual efficiency. They dropped to his sides and stayed there. 4 seconds. In 4 seconds Rynn Dekker dropped back to the arena floor, moved to Thonn's right side, got low, drove his shoulder into the back of Thonn's right knee from a sideways angle, and pushed. And Thonn Brex, 3.1 meters, 360 kilograms, 44-0 record, went down. The sound from 6,000 beings when Thonn Brex hit the floor of that arena was unlike anything I had witnessed in my career. It was not cheering. It was not alarm. It was not the collective groan of gamblers watching their money migrate away from them. It was something that had elements of all three of those things, and also something else underneath it. Something that I can only describe as the specific involuntary noise that thinking beings make when they witness something that their understanding of the universe did not include a slot for. It was the noise of a conceptual update happening in real time across 6,000 simultaneous minds. Preet was on her feet beside me. She did not appear to be aware she was on her feet. Her datapad was on the floor where she had dropped it, and she was staring at the arena below with an expression that combined professional disbelief with something approaching genuine awe. "Groth," she said. "I see it," I said. I see it. How did he know where to fit? Right of Winter, in except in pupils in Tibun and Takedown. Right. She sat back down. Then she stood up again immediately because Thonn Brex was not finished. Here is the thing about Korrathi warriors, and the thing that makes their win record so consistent even against opponents who manage surprising early moments: they do not stay down. Thonn Brex had hit the floor. Thonn Brex was not remaining on the floor. He was already rolling, already using the momentum of the fall to continue into a recovery rotation that brought him back to one knee faster than anything that size should have been able to move. His arms were back online, clearly, because all 4 of them hit the floor to support the recovery. He came up to his feet with a sound that carried across the arena even through the crowd noise, a deep exhaled sound that the Korrathi make when they shift from assessment to full commitment. Thonn Brex was no longer treating this as a standard bout. The crowd noise dropped again, back to that focused, concentrated tension that had been building since Rynn had taken the direct strike and stayed standing. Rynn, for his part, had put distance between himself and Thonn during the recovery sequence. He was on the far side of the arena floor, and he was breathing harder than he had been 60 seconds ago. The left arm was still lower. Whatever the crossblock had done to it, the damage had not resolved on its own. He was also, I should mention, still doing that expression. Thonn looked at him across the arena floor. And then Thonn did something he had not done in any of his recorded 44 fights. He raised all 4 arms, not in the casual acknowledgement he had given the crowd during his entrance, all 4, fully extended, a display posture that in Korrathi culture carries a very specific meaning. I had to look it up in the species cultural database later, and when I did it read as follows: full arm extension directed at an opponent during combat is a Korrathi acknowledgement of a challenge as legitimate. It is reserved for opponents who have demonstrated sufficient capability to be considered genuine competition. In 44 fights Thonn Brex had never done that. He did it for Rynn Dekker. And then he came across the arena floor at full speed, all 4 arms moving, and the fight entered a phase that I do not have entirely adequate language to describe. I will tell you what I could see from my observer position, which was everything, and I will tell you what the probability engine was showing, which was also everything, and together maybe we can assemble a picture of the next 4 minutes. Thonn's new approach was not the grab. It was not the straight strike. It was something that combined elements of both into a sequence designed to give Rynn no clear sideways option, because Thonn had figured out that sideways was Rynn's primary evasion direction, and he was now deploying his arm span, which was considerable, to reduce the available angles. Rynn saw this. Of course he saw this. He shifted from sideways movement to something more 3-dimensional, changing height as well as direction, using drops and pivots to move through the closing space in patterns that were not entirely predictable even to me watching from above. They were moving fast, both of them, Rynn nowhere near Thonn's raw speed, but using angle and anticipation to compensate in a way that meant the speed differential was not translating directly into contact opportunities the way it should have been. Contact happened, several times. Thonn landed a glancing strike across Rynn's shoulder that sent the human spinning and clearly added to the damage on the left side. Rynn responded by immediately using the spin's momentum to increase his rotation and deliver a heel strike to Thonn's forearm, with more force than the move should logically have generated. Rynn took a grab to the upper chest that partially connected and sent him into the barrier field at the arena edge. He hit it, bounced, and somehow converted the bounce into a forward roll that brought him back onto the arena floor 3 meters from Thonn before the follow-up could arrive. The crowd noise during this section of the fight was continuous, not structured cheering, not chanting, just a constant rolling sound that shifted in pitch and volume with every contact event, 6,000 beings riding the momentum of something they had stopped trying to categorize and had simply committed to witnessing. The probability engine. 3 minutes into the fight, Thonn Brex win probability, 61.7%. 3.5 minutes, 54.2%. I stared at that number and felt something in my chest that Vurrak do not typically talk about publicly, but that we all experience, the sensation of an assumption disintegrating. Preet was reading the same feed. She put her hand on my arm, which Drenkai do when they want another being to pay close attention to something without drawing broader attention to it. Groth, she said quietly, the engine just flagged a category update. Not because Rynn was doing something impossible, not because the data was somehow corrupt, but because the pattern of decisions he was making, the specific sequence of assessments and responses and physical commitments, was not matching any of the 312 human combat profiles the engine had in its database. It had never seen a human fight like this. I had never seen anyone fight like this. What is he? Preet asked, and she was not asking rhetorically. He is a human, I said. That is what his file says, she agreed. But what is he doing? And the honest answer, the one that I did not say out loud because saying it out loud would have made it too real too fast, was, he is winning. 4 minutes and 18 seconds into the fight, something changed. Thonn Brex was visibly fatigued. This was not something I had expected to write in an observation report about a Korrathi gladiator, and yet here we were. The sustained high-speed engagement had cost him energy at a rate that a fight of this length normally did not require, because normal fights of this length did not require 44 continuous minutes of complex tracking, adjustment, and reacquisition. Thonn was built for overwhelming force delivered quickly. He was not built for a 4-minute chess match conducted at combat speed against an opponent who kept refusing to be where he was supposed to be. The cumulative knee damage was showing too. His movement was not wrong exactly, but it had a weight to it on the right side that had not been there at the start. Rynn was hurting, let me be clear about that. The left arm was compromised. His breathing was audible from the ambient pickups, and the shoulder impact had left a visible change in how he was carrying the left side of his body. He was operating at reduced capacity on that side, and he knew it, which was why he had been positioning to favor his right consistently for the last 2 minutes. But he was present, he was moving, he was thinking. And then Thonn Brex did something that in retrospect I understood completely. He had been fighting a mobile, evasive opponent for over 4 minutes. He had not successfully executed a clean hold or a decisive strike. His standard approaches had been disrupted repeatedly. Every tactical adjustment he had made had been countered in ways he had not encountered in 44 fights. He was frustrated. Thonn Brex, in a moment of frustration that his long, undefeated record had apparently not prepared him to manage, abandoned strategy entirely and committed to a full charge, maximum speed, maximum force, no secondary plans, just the pure physical overwhelming of an opponent through sheer mass and velocity. It was understandable. It was human almost in the ironic sense, that desperate impulse to stop being clever and just do the most obvious powerful thing. And it was exactly what Rynn had been waiting for. I saw it. I saw the moment Rynn saw the charge coming, and I saw the specific shift in his posture that meant he had already decided what he was going to do, and I watched him do it with the detached professionalism of a being who has calculated the answer to a problem before the problem has fully arrived. He did not move sideways. He moved forward, directly into the charge. The crowd made that sound again, the sharp collective intake, because the image of a human running toward a charging Korrathi gladiator looked, from the outside, like the moment a fight ended in the worst possible way. Rynn hit the floor in a slide. Legs first, at the last possible moment before the collision would have occurred, sliding under the extended grab arms and under the body mass of the charge, passing directly beneath Thonn at ground level. And as he passed under the Korrathi's body, he reached up and caught Thonn's right leg at the ankle with both hands and pulled. Not with strength. Rynn Dekker could not overpower a Korrathi's leg with pure strength, not now, not with a compromised arm, not ever on the best day of his life. But Thonn Brex's full charge momentum was already committed forward. Every kilogram of that charge was moving in one direction. All Rynn did was give the ankle a single, precisely angled, precisely timed pull that redirected a small part of that forward force sideways. You do not need to stop 360 kilograms to beat it. You just need to change its direction. Thonn Brex went forward and sideways simultaneously, which is not a direction that a body can travel gracefully, and he hit the arena floor at speed, all four arms unable to catch the fall in time because the fall happened faster than the arms could process the change, and this time when he went down, the floor of the arena shook with the impact loudly enough that I felt it in the soles of my feet from 20 meters above. Rynn came out of the slide at Thonn's side, and before the Korrathi could begin the recovery roll, he was there, on Thonn's back. Both arms locked around the neck in the specific configuration that cuts blood flow to the brain through external pressure on the carotid equivalents, and his legs wrapped around the torso, and he held on. A Korrathi losing consciousness from oxygen restriction requires approximately 12 seconds if the hold is applied correctly. Thonn Brex fought for all 12 of them. All four arms reached back. He rolled. He slammed backward against the arena floor using his own body weight to try to create enough impact that Rynn would release. The hold did not break. Rynn compressed tighter with every attempted break, like something that gets stronger the harder you push against it, and every second that passed cost Thonn Brex oxygen that his brain was increasingly unwilling to operate without. 11 seconds. 12. Thonn Brex's arms stopped moving. The official cessation signal sounded 4 seconds after that, when the arena's monitoring systems confirmed unconsciousness and the medical team crossed the barrier field and confirmed no critical injury. For a period of time that I estimated at 3 seconds but that felt significantly longer, the arena at Vurrak's point was silent. 6,000 beings. Total silence. And then Rynn Dekker, still breathing hard, stood up in the center of the arena floor with his left arm pressed against his chest, looked up at the 6,000 beings who had been absolutely certain they were about to watch him lose, and he said nothing. He did not say anything. He did not gesture. He did not perform. He just stood there, with that expression, and let the silence fill with whatever the 6,000 beings needed to put into it. What they put into it was noise. It started somewhere in the upper tiers, a single area, and spread outward and downward like something catching, like the sound equivalent of a fire that finds unexpected fuel, and within 20 seconds the arena was producing a volume of sound that I, in my professional capacity, had never documented from a venue of this size. 6,000 beings who had bet against him, cheering for him. Money, apparently, is no match for the experience of watching something impossible happen directly in front of you. The medical team attended to both fighters. Thonn Brex regained consciousness within 2 minutes, sat up, looked around the arena with the expression of a being who is piecing together recent events in reverse order, and then did something that made Preet grab my arm again. He looked toward where Rynn Dekker was being checked over by the medical staff across the arena floor, and he raised all 4 arms in his direction. The crowd saw it. The crowd lost any remaining composure it had been maintaining. Rynn saw it. He raised his right arm back, the good one, and nodded once. Simple, clean, the nod of someone who acknowledges a compliment without making too much of it. Preet was crying, not dramatically. Drenkai do not do dramatic crying, but there were tears moving down her face in the particular quiet way that means something got past the professional distance faster than the defenses could close. "Stop it," I told her. "I am not doing anything," she said. "You are crying at a sporting event." "I am experiencing appropriate moisture in response to stimuli," she said, and wiped her face with her sleeve without any apparent embarrassment. "I need to tell you about the Oblique House. Specifically, I need to tell you about what was happening in Vurrak's office during the 12 seconds that Thonn Brex was losing consciousness on the arena floor below. I was not there, but I spoke to Vexon about it afterward, in the way that observers sometimes gather context from peripheral witnesses, and Vec described it as follows. Vurrak stood at his office window and watched the fight with the composure of a being who ran a gambling operation and therefore understood, philosophically, that outcomes did not always match probabilities. This composure lasted approximately until the moment Thonn Brex hit the floor for the second time, at which point Vurrak turned from the window and looked at the 4 financial staff members he kept in his office for exactly these situations. "Tell me the exposure," he said. The lead financial staff member of Roku named Pellax, who I knew by professional reputation as someone who had the specific skill of delivering catastrophic financial news in a calm, clear, entirely emotionless voice, looked at her screen and said, "Sir, the current payout obligation at 100-to-1 odds against the humans' credited bets is 46 million credits." Vurrak said nothing. "The House Reserve," Pellax continued, in that same flat voice, "is 31 million credits. More nothing. There is a shortfall of 15 million credits." Vurrak finally moved. He sat down in his chair. He put 3 of his forearms on his desk and one against his face, and he breathed in a way that suggested the breathing was doing more structural work than usual. "The human," he said, after a period of time that Velk described as long enough that I thought something had gone wrong with him physically, bet on himself. "Yes, sir." "At 100 to 1 odds." "Yes, sir." "Against everything he owns." "Yes, sir." "Which means he is personally owed." Pellax looked at her screen. "The human's personal payout is 340,000 credits, sir." Another pause. "And the rest," Vurrak said, "goes to every other bettor on the station who managed to place a bet on the human, sir." There were 31 of them. 31. Out of a station population of approximately 8,000. 31 beings had looked at 100 to 1 odds against a human facing Thonn Brex and thought, "That is interesting, I would like some of that." I was not one of them. I had tried to be one of them, and the window had closed. I want to be clear about this. Vurrak sat in his chair and experienced what I am told was a very long, very thorough, very private conversation with his own financial future. And then he stood up and walked to the window again and looked down at the arena floor where Rynn Dekker was having his arm looked at by the medical team. "Get me a meeting with the human," Vurrak said. The meeting happened in a private room off the main corridor of the arena level. I was not invited. I was also technically required to be present as the official observer for any post-fight discussions involving prize money or contractual obligations. Vurrak's legal staff had apparently forgotten this requirement. I had not. I walked in. Vurrak looked at me. I looked at Vurrak. There was a moment of professional assessment between us. "Observer Pellax," he said, "this is a private meeting. Observer presence is mandatory for all post-fight financial discussions under Vurrak's Point Operating Charter, Section 14, Article 7. I said, "I have a copy if you need it." Vurrak gestured at a chair. I sat in it. It was, relative to my observer chair in the arena, considerably more comfortable. The universe has a sense of timing. Rynn Dekker was across the table. His left arm was in a temporary brace, the kind the medical team applies when something needs immobilization but does not require immediate surgery. He was holding a cup of something hot with his right hand and looking at Vurrak with the same expression he had been wearing since I first met him. Easy, present, already thinking. Vurrak, to his credit, did not waste time on pleasantries that neither of them would have believed. "The Oblique House has a liquidity problem," he said. "I know," Rynn said. "You knew before you placed your bet." Rynn looked at his cup. "I did research on the house's reserve levels before I entered registration. Your operational finances are partially public record for licensing compliance purposes." He looked up. "You set odds at 100 to 1 because you assumed the bet was safe, but you did not run a scenario where the underdog won because your system does not seriously model outcomes that have less than 3% probability." Vurrak's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. "You are telling me you knew we would not be able to cover a full payout." "I am telling you I planned for it," Rynn said, "which is why I am here having this conversation instead of demanding immediate transfer and watching your operation implode." The room was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" Vurrak asked. Rynn set down the cup. "I want my payout. All of it. Full 340,000 today." "That is manageable," Vurrak said, and you could hear the relief in it even through the professional restraint. "And I want a contract," Rynn continued. "A regular contract. 6 fights per standard year, at a base fee plus percentage of the betting pool for my bouts. Negotiated to reflect the fact that I just demonstrated that I am the most interesting fighter on your roster." Vurrak looked at him for a long moment. "You plan to fight here again?" "I plan to fight here many times," Rynn said. "Which means you need me more than you would like to admit right now, and I need an operation with the reach of the Oblique House to make the next part of this work. So," he picked up his cup again, "we can discuss terms, or I can take my payout, walk out of here, and you can explain to your consortium why your reserve account looks the way it does." Vurrak was quiet for long enough that Thonn, standing by the door, began the subtle repositioning that personal assistants do when they are uncertain whether they will need to exit quickly. Then Vurrak said, "Pellax." Pellax appeared from somewhere near the wall. "Datapad already open. Draw up a contract," Vurrak said. "Standard fighter terms as the base. We will negotiate from there." He looked at Rynn Dekker across the table. "You are considerably more complicated than the probability engine suggested," he said. "Most humans are," Rynn said. "That's the thing about us. We are bad at fitting into the probability models you build around us. We know what those models say, and we know what happens when someone believes the model completely. He looked at Vurrak steadily. The house always wins. Until the house is so sure it cannot lose that it forgets to plan for losing. And then, Vurrak said slowly, the house goes bankrupt. And then, Rynn agreed, the house goes bankrupt. I filed my official observation report 3 hours later. The report contained the following factual elements: the fight, the outcome, the confirmation that all events were within the bounds of sanctioned combat regulations, the notation that the probability engine had flagged an unclassified human combat profile, and a recommendation that the engine's human species database be updated with the footage from this bout. What the report did not contain, because official observation reports are not the place for personal reflection, was the other thing I had been thinking about since I left that meeting room. Rynn Dekker had come to Vurrak's point with a plan. Not a fight plan. A plan that used the fight as one component of a larger structure. He had researched the Oblique House's finances. He had chosen Thonn Brex specifically because the odds would be highest against him. He had bet everything he had. He had prepared for the possibility that the payout would be a problem and had a negotiation strategy ready. He had turned a single fight into a foothold in the most powerful combat operation in this sector of the galaxy. He had looked at a situation where every variable was against him, where the money was against him, where the biology was against him, where 44 and 0 was against him, and he had not tried to make those variables less unfair. He had used them. That is the thing I could not fully put into the report. The thing that sat in my mind the entire transport ride back to my assignment base in a chair that was significantly more comfortable than anything at Vurrak's point. The thing that I have been trying to articulate since I started writing this account. We look at humans and we see the metrics. Small, fragile, short-lived, low biological capacity in almost every measurable category. We run them through the engine, and the engine tells us what they can do, and we believe the engine, because the engine has been right for 47 years with a 7% maximum error margin. We do not ask what humans will do when the engine says they should not win. We do not account for the particular, very specific, extremely inconvenient quality that Rynn Dekker tried to tell me about in that preparation room, in words that I heard and wrote in my memory but did not fully translate until I watched him do it. Humans are unreasonably stubborn. Not stubborn in the way that fails, stubborn in the way that refuses to accept the framework that says failure is the logical outcome. Stubborn in the way that looks at a 97.3% probability and says, so there is 2.7%. Let me work with that. Stubborn in the way that looks at a Korrathi gladiator with 44 wins and a species biology that should make the outcome obvious, and says, good, now I know how hard you hit. The last thing I want to tell you about is what happened 4 days after the fight, because it is the part that completed the picture for me. I was still at Vurrak's point, finishing the last sections of my observation documentation, when Preet found me in the observation lounge with her datapad held up in the specific way she holds it when she has found something she considers significant. Look at this, she said. It was a registration notification from the Oblique House, a new fight scheduled for 2 months out on the main arena calendar. Rynn Dekker, in the challenger position. His opponent was a Velhari combat specialist named Drink Voss, whose record was 31-2 and who was considered one of the top 5 fighters active in the sanctioned circuits in this region. The Oblique House had already set the odds, 40-1, against the human. I stared at the number for a while. They dropped the odds, Preet said. Compared to the last fight, they had to, I said. After what happened with Thonn Brex, they cannot justify 100-1 anymore. The engine updated its profile on him. 40-1 is still very high. It is, I agreed. Preet looked at me. Are you going to bet? I thought about that preparation room. I thought about the cards being shuffled with easy hands. I thought about now I know how hard you hit. I thought about the probability engine flagging an unclassified profile and the 7% maximum error margin and 31 beings on a station of 8,000 who had looked at impossible odds and said yes. Betting pools open in 3 days. I said. Preet nodded. She set down the datapad on the table between us. I already placed mine, she said. I looked at her. You bet on the human. I bet on the human, she confirmed, with the particular dignity of someone who has made a decision they are not going to be argued out of. I picked up the datapad and looked at the registration one more time. The fight date, the odds, the name, Rynn Dekker, 7-0. In 2 months, possibly 8-0. And somewhere on this station right now, probably sitting in a room somewhere, possibly shuffling a deck of recreational playing cards with easy hands, was a human who had already done the calculation. I put down the data pad. I went and placed my bet. For the record, and I include this in this account purely as factual documentation with no personal emotional content whatsoever, Rynn Dekker won his second fight at Vurrak's point in 4 minutes and 6 seconds. The Oblique House, which had adjusted its reserves and carefully managed its exposure after the first incident, still ended up paying out significantly more than was comfortable. The probability engine updated its human profile 4 times in the following standard year. It now has a separate classification category. The label it generated automatically from the fight data is not a word in any language currently in the system. It is a phrase the engine created by combining combat pattern descriptors, and the closest translation I have found is something like presently miscalculated. Vurrak, when informed of the new classification, reportedly looked at it for a long time and then said, "Put it on the promotional materials." It is now, in fact, part of the arena's promotional materials for every Rynn Dekker fight. The bets keep coming in against him. The odds keep being set high because the engine still cannot fully model what it is looking at, and high odds on an unmodeled fighter is standard practice. And Rynn Dekker keeps winning. Not because the universe decided to be fair, not because the biology changed, not because the engine made a technical error, because sometimes a species evolves on a planet that is so continuously, relentlessly, aggressively unkind to them, with predators and weather and disease and the spectacular variety of ways their own world has found to end them over millions of years, that the ones who survive develop something that does not show up in biological metrics or probability models. The specific, unreasonable, inexhaustible refusal to accept what the numbers say, and when you send that quality into an arena and tell it that the odds are against it, all you have really done is handed a reason to be interested. My name is Groth Pellax. I have now watched 349 fights. 7 of them have involved humans. I have not bet against a human since that first night at Vurrak's point. My record, since making that adjustment, is 7-0. I will freely admit, learning,